Hello, my name is Matthew Gellin, and today I'm going to be reviewing the book When the Emperor Was Divine by Julie Otsuka. And I'll have a spoiler and a non-spoiler section of this book, and we'll start with the non-spoiler, and I'll let you guys know when I go to the spoiler so you can pause it if you haven't read it yet. So, When the Emperor Was Divine is a book about the Japanese internment camps during World War II. And it's fiction, but some of the author's family actually was in the internment camp, so this topic is definitely near and dear to her. So I'll jump right in with a non-spoiler summary. So again, it's about a family from California, and one day they see signs posted on the door that are all over town that they have to be sent to a Japanese internment camp. So they pack up all their stuff and they go. And the story has 5 chapters, and each chapter is told from a different person's point of view. So the first chapter is told from the mother's point of view, she's just called woman. The second chapter is told through the sister's point of view, and she is just called girl. The third chapter is told through the boy's point of view, and he's just called boy. The fourth chapter is told through a combination of the girl and the boy's point of view, and the fifth chapter is told through the father's point of view. And it's really interesting how the author included not to have names for any of the characters, and it definitely goes to symbolize the government treatment of these Japanese Americans during the World War II. They weren't even good enough to have names. They were just people. They were just boy and woman, and I mean they were really numbers, but it just breaks it down to really who they were. And the father, which I mentioned, who his point of view is told from the 5th chapter, he was actually arrested before the family got sent to internment camp because they thought he was a suspect or a spy, so he was actually in another internment camp away from the family. So my rating of the book is 8 out of 10. I definitely liked it. It was definitely a very good book. I would recommend it for someone that wants a very eye-opening book. Definitely someone who likes history, historical fiction for sure, and someone who just wants their eyes opened on, what really happened and stuff. So now I'm going to jump into the spoiler section of the review. So if you have not yet read the book, I would suggest turning this review off right now. So, alright, so I'll jump right into it. So I'm just going to start with basically another summary. So the story really follows the characters' kind of development throughout the story, each one of the characters' development, and how the internment camps really affected each one of the characters. So, like the story is told from, well, the story isn't told from one person to another, but it's told from one point of view at a time. I'm going to break down the characters' kind of development throughout the story, and it's important to note that all these characters are round and dynamic characters. They change throughout the book. So the first character I'm going to break down is the girl. So the girl, I would say what really happened to her when she went to the internment camps is and each person was stripped of something. So I think the girl was stripped of her identity, I think would be the best classification. Because while she was at the internment camp, she turned into like a classic American girl. She started, smoking cigarettes and just doing stuff that was foreign to her family, stuff that they'd never seen before. And likewise, I would also say that the boy was stripped of his identity. The boys chapter 3, is about why they're actually in the internment camps. So we really get to see the development much better, or the effects of the internment camp much better through the boy than through the girl. So we see how the boy is innocent, really. He's an innocent boy who wants his culture, and he's just being stripped of it in the internment camp, and he wants so badly for things to be normal for him to keep his culture, but he can't do that. And I think one of the most interesting and one of the most deepest parts of the book is when the mother tells the boy, you can't say the emperor's name because people will think, you're aligned with him. and the boy, he occasionally he just says it under his breath to show his defiancy and show his desire to want to be, normal, want to go back to his heritage, but he really can't, which I thought was really powerful. And now I'll move on to the woman, or who was the mother of the two. And in the first chapter of the book, the story depicts the mother as super strong. There was a dog, a family dog, and she couldn't take the dog to the internment camps, and she couldn't find anybody to take care of the dog, so she actually had to kill the dog. And in that scene, it showed how strong she was. And throughout the book, the mother was stripped of this strength, and that's what I think. She was stripped up. She was stripped of her will, because in the internment camp we see her. After she's been in the internment camp for a while, she doesn't go outside. She spends days just sitting in her dorm, and she says she can't even tell anymore if she's sleeping or awake, and they're just miserable for her. So it takes her strength. When they're first on the train, when they first arrive at the internment camp, the mother is strong and keeps the children going. Like, it's gonna be okay. But throughout, this will just dissipates, and she's no longer, helpful to the children, and she's no longer that same strength that she had. She's scared. And even when she comes back from the internment camp, it shows that she's scared. She has the children sleep in one separate room, in one secure room, and she sleeps in one separate room, just because she's scared of everything that's going to happen. That strength is just gone. And finally, I will break down the father, who had the biggest transformation, I'd say. I said he was stripped of himself. He was no longer himself when he came back. Throughout the novel, from the boy and the mother and the girl's description, we paint this picture of the father as being an awesome father, really energetic. It talks about how he loves to read books to his children. He loves to play games with them. He's just a really great father to them. And the kids love that. And that's what, the kids dream about, actually, while they're in the internment camp, is that their father's going to come back and everything's going to normal and they're going to play with their father out in the yard. But that simply doesn't happen when the father comes back. He's a completely changed man. He no longer reads to the kids, plays to the kids. He stays secluded in himself. And in a really interesting scene, it talks about how the father, he couldn't find a job, so the father would spend his whole time writing. And talks about how the father, his handwriting slowly grew smaller and smaller until his handwriting was really no more, which is really symbolic. His handwriting is himself. He started out like awesome handwriting, and it just slowly and slowly dissipated until it wasn't himself. So in physical form, yeah, the man came back to the house, came back to his family, but in reality and in mental form, the father was left at the internment camps. He was forever changed. So, I'll get into some themes now. So, I think there's two really big major themes in this novel, and the first of which is hypocrisy. The book doesn't explicitly talk about the Nazi concentration camps, but it's eerily similar. If you know anything about history, it's grossly similar. And the most disturbing part is all this is real. While we were fighting the concentration camps, we were having some in America, and it's just the hypocrisy of everything, the hypocrisy of the American citizens. Even today, like, we say the land of the free, and these Japanese Americans weren't free. It wasn't the land of the free to them. And just that amazing hypocrisy of how much racism really went into this is quite remarkable, and that's a big major theme. And I'd say the second major theme is effects of imprisonment and loss of identity. So we saw all these characters, all four of them, they got taken away of their freedom. And with that, they got taken away of their identities. Like in one of the scenes when the children were back at their home after the internment camps, it talks about how much they're stripped of their identity and how much they didn't even go by their names anymore because they didn't want the kids to make fun of them because they were Japanese, so they picked American names. And it talks about how how they didn't really interact with any kids anymore. They just kept to themselves because they didn't want to make fun of their identity. Their culture has been stripped. The boy no longer said the emperor's name under his breath and no longer had any connection with his heritage. And going back to that hypocrisy point, I forgot to mention something that I'd really like to mention. It talks about in one scene on the train, and the train was chapter 2, so it was the girl's narrative. This man came up to the girl and asked and told him and said something in Japanese, and the girl responded by saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, I only speak English," which just shows the hypocrisy of the whole situation, because this family didn't even speak Japanese. They spoke American. They were integrated into the American culture. Of course, they still had their Japanese heritage, but they were integrated into the American culture, as illustrated by the fact that they only spoke English, the American language. And it's just stunning how, despite this, just because of the color of the skin and, their origin, that they were highly, highly discriminated against. So I forgot that point. I thought that was worth going back. So now I'll get into some of the symbols. So the first symbol I want to talk about is the emperor, and I've already talked about it quite a bit, but again, it symbolized the heritage and the Japanese culture, and how the soldier said, "No, you can't say the emperor's word and the emperor's name anymore," because they were quite literally stripping them of that Japanese culture. They said to them, "You can no longer be Japanese," which is amazing. It's just quite not amazing. I mean, that was a terrible word. It's quite. What's the word I'm looking for? It's terrible, honestly. Actually, it's unbelievable. That's the word I was looking for. It's unbelievably terrible that happened. And the next symbol I want to talk about is trees. So before the family leaves to go to the internment camp, they plant a tree in their front yard, and their whole house is filled with trees. But when they get to the internment camp, there's no trees to ever be seen. And the trees symbolize their home, and their absence from home is the absence of trees, their absence of comfort. And on the train ride to the internment camp, there was a mention about trees, and someone said, "I heard there's not going to be any trees here," and that was just a complete shock, because it was nothing like home, and they just wanted to get back to those trees. They just wanted to get back home. And finally, I'll talk about the last symbol that is horses. And again, on the train ride there, the boy revealed how he loved horses. And while they were going through Utah, actually it was New Mexico. As they were going through New Mexico, the boy saw this band of wild horses, and he was so fascinated. But these wild horses were running away from him. And again, those horses also symbolize the Japanese culture the Japanese culture. The horses, the thing that the boy was so fascinated, he loved them, it was running away from them. He couldn't get them. It was going away. And later, while they're at the internment camp, the boy ponders, where does this food come from? And the girl, who is again Americanized right now, sasses the boy and says, "Oh, they cut up those horses and eat them," which is, it's symbolic in the way that the girl has now become Americanized, where she taunts her brother just like all the other American girls, which, it could be just normal growing up, but before the internment camp, she really was not like this. She was really very sweet to her brother, and I think it really symbolizes how she got Americanized. But anyways, it also symbolizes how, even though it was the horses was the food, the Americans were killing Japanese culture. They were shooting the horses, and they were shooting the Japanese culture, and it could never return. So my final thoughts on this book: I think it's a book that everybody should read. It's honestly super hard to read, not because it's boring or dense, just because of the hypocrisy in it, and it's just hard to fathom that America, the great nation, did that. And there's a lot going on with racism right now, and there's a lot going on in our country with racism right now, and there's a lot of very heated issues. And I think it's really important for everyone to read this book so they can understand the effects of racism and the effects it has on these people's lives, these entire people's lives. So this was The Emperor Was Divine by, what was her name? By Julie Otsuka, and I would recommend the book. And my name is Matthew, and thank you.